All right, so here is going to be my curriculum and pedagogy evaluation. This is David Miedema. This is for Education 509. I'm choosing a presentation instead of a written paper because I feel like that'd be more applicable for what I would actually do in a more real setting. With that being said, I don't think I'm going to approach this presentation as though I'm talking to other staff members or a school board or anything like that, because that's a little too fabricated. And I think it'll lose a little bit of clarity and meaning to what I'm saying. But I am choosing a presentation because that's the format I would be using if I was actually sharing this with other people at my school, which maybe I will. So just to give some context and overview, my current position, or at least the position I'll be holding next year, will be at Hudsonville Christian Middle School, which is in West Michigan. I will be an 8th grade teacher, mostly teaching U.S. history, but also teaching a class of Bible as well. For Hudsonville Christian School, the mission is challenging minds and lives for Christ, and each year they choose a different theme. And this upcoming year's theme is going to be One Body. This was chosen by students, and this is based on the passage found in Romans 12, verses 4 and 5, which talks about how, as the church, we are one body of Christ with many parts. And that's going to be the theme for this upcoming year. So hopefully, this target audience would be to other middle school teachers, staff, and faculty. My goal of this presentation is to overview our current practice and development of curriculum, and do so by one, highlighting and celebrating the strengths we have, and describing areas for us to grow moving forward, and specifically moving forward in light of what our school mission, challenging minds and lives for Christ, and the upcoming theme for the year, One Body. How can we develop our curriculum with those two things in mind? So first, just an overview of what I'll be talking about. We're going to start off with celebrations. So I'll talk about one thing we do well, and this is specific to social studies in particular, although this can apply to other content areas as well, is combining digital and physical sources of information. 2, the use of primary source document-based research. And then third, written explanation being done by students in a thorough and meaningful way. And then 3 areas for growth moving forward in social studies department specifically, but once again this could apply to other content areas too, would be diversifying instructional strategies, promoting higher order thinking skills, and implementing the C3 framework, which is a part of the new Michigan State Social Studies standards that were implemented about a year ago. So first, we're going to celebrate strengths. One important thing to do within any school, whether that's teachers or school leaders or students, is to come together as one body to share joys and burdens with each other. So I'd like to start by sharing some joys and some areas of success for curriculum within the social studies department. So 1, new updated 21st century access to information. We had a new textbook that was implemented a year ago called History Alive, and we were able to have both the online version of that textbook, the ebook, as well as a physical hard copy version of the book in the classroom. And this allowed us to keep things relevant, as much information that's accessed in 2020 is digital and online, and also allowed us to be flexible. We have one-to-one Chromebooks, so having an online textbook allows each student individual access, not with the hard copy heavy book, but also at home with their Chromebook. This is especially important and especially successful as we entered distance learning back in May, and allowed us to be much more flexible with giving students more access to information, even though we couldn't meet together in a physical classroom setting. So one area of success to celebrate, a joy for us to celebrate, is being able to have a more modern way to access information through both a physical and online textbook. Second thing, use of primary sources. Being able to study history in particular, using first-hand primary source documents, helps develop higher order thinking skills, as you have to corroborate the evidence, you've got to evaluate the evidence. It also develops empathy and understanding of others. It helps make history come alive by viewing issues and understanding historical events from the perspective of those who actually lived it. And that adds skills of empathy to put yourself in those shoes, and also greater understanding by being able to understand those situations from the people who actually experience them, and kind of putting ourselves in the place of those people back in those historical time periods. And then the third area of success that we'll share is thorough written explanation, the ability for us to give meaningful student work when it comes to writing, being able to understand and utilize the power of story in doing that. One thing that we did in the social studies classroom was we talked about how history is just one big story, and ultimately it's a story controlled by God, and ultimately we do have a place in that story, but we are not the main character. So being able to understand history through the lens of the power of story, also being able to consider not just what that story was like, but how that can apply to our stories today in light of the fact that we serve and live for a creator God, and how do we fit within that story. Students being able to produce high-level written work with that narrative lens in mind allowed students to develop more personal meaning and improve their writing and communication skills through those activities and that work. So I'd like to talk about next is 3 specific areas for how we can improve our curriculum, and specifically to improve it to more fully fulfill our school mission, which once again, for Hudsonville Christian School, is challenging minds and lives for Christ. So how can we move our social studies curriculum forward in a way that more fully does that, challenging minds and lives for Christ? One particular area for growth is diversifying our instructional methods when we develop curriculum and do our lesson and unit planning. So this maybe goes more into the pedagogy side of things, but they're obviously tied together. The reason why we would want to diversify and introduce new types of instruction, one is in light of our school theme for this upcoming year, that we are one body, but we consist of many parts. And using diverse instructional methods allows us to capture the interest and imagination of students to help them discover their gifts and interests. Also will help them spark more imaginative and creative thinking. Although we have a new textbook and we were able to use it well, oftentimes textbooks can actually limit students' ability to be imaginative and to think in creative and critical ways, which therefore limits their ability to discover and use those gifts and interests in order to challenge their minds and lives for Christ. Also, by diversifying instruction, we can more fully implement differentiated curriculum and instruction and meet students where they are. Hopefully, using some of these different techniques, we can do these 3 things. So one way for us to do that, how we diversify instructional methods, is by trying to offer activities that provide for more student choice and are more student-centered. Ultimately, we are challenging students' lives and student minds. We can do that more fully by making sure that our curriculum is developed in a way that puts the student at the center of learning. So the student isn't just a passive recipient of learning, but instead they're an active participant towards their learning. Part of how we do that is by increasing student choice and making sure we have student-centered curriculum. Another way we can do this is by providing learning experiences and curriculum that is collaborative and communal. Part of us being image bearers of Christ, which is reflected in our school mission, is that we are not meant to be alone and that no man is an island, and being one body means we are working together despite the fact that we are many parts. So increasing the amount of collaborative and communal work and being able to do those work in meaningful ways will help us live out this school theme more fully. And some specific activities that can represent this is doing things like simulations and debates. What we want students to do is work together, collaborative, communal, give them student choice and make it student-centered. Part of how we can do that is by giving learning experiences that allow students not just to receive information and just to cover the material, but we want them to discover and uncover their learning. And that's part of how we challenge student minds, which fits in to our school theme. So being able to implement more active activities like simulations and debates is one way we can diversify instructional methods. A second area for growth for us is to promote higher order thinking skills in how we develop our curriculum and assessment. Reason why we do this is because by challenging student minds, we can improve their achievement, both in our classes as well as other tests. And even though we don't want to define our school's success by how well we do on a standardized test, it is something we can strive to have. We always want to improve student outcomes and achievement, and research shows that by promoting the higher order thinking skills, particularly on Bloom's taxonomy, we are able to do that. Also, by challenging students using those higher order thinking skills, we will help improve their perceptions towards studying history. It's not just going to be memorizing material, but it's taking that material and analyzing it, evaluating it, and that will increase student engagement, which will consequently improve their perceptions towards studying history. Once again, this fits in especially with that first half of our mission, with students, and that is challenging their minds by having those higher order thinking skills. So some ways we can do that. One, we can more closely evaluate our learning targets and objectives in unit plans and lesson plans using Bloom's taxonomy, and strive for learning targets that go towards the top of that pyramid, not just the basic level of thinking skills towards the bottom. And we can plan lessons and units using essential questions and using backwards design. And this will emphasize not just covering content with breadth, but emphasizing depth, that's backwards. So it should say emphasizing depth over breadth. We want to get deeper into the material. We want students to really wrestle with and develop their own levels of understanding. We don't just want to cover a bunch of topics at a surface level. We want to emphasize, once again, depth that should be over breadth. So just to review kind of how essential questions in Bloom's taxonomy works, we are trying to get students to think towards the top of this pyramid. So the orange, the yellow, and the light green. We want them creating work, evaluating work, analyzing. There is still room for remembering and understanding, but we don't want our courses and our planning and social studies to be centered on just remembering and understanding. We want to use this as a foundation to build upon to get to these higher levels of thinking skills. And when we plan our units, we want to use backwards design, which means we plan with the end in mind first. And part of how we do that is by creating essential questions for our courses. So this backwards design theory was developed by Wiggins and McTighe. What we're looking for in our essential questions and what makes a question essential is we want them to be open-ended. There's not just one specific right answer. There's multiple. We want them to be thought-provoking. Once again, going with Bloom's taxonomy, we want higher order thinking skills, the creating, the evaluating, the applying, the analyzing. We want transferable ideas, which means we want to create essential questions that aren't just within social studies, but things that can actually cross into other content areas. And one thing I hope the teachers can consider is how can we find these big picture questions that students can consider and use and apply outside of a social studies classroom. We want it to spark inquiry. Right? We love answers to questions and responses, but sometimes the art of asking the right questions is a way we can create a more student-centered curriculum. We want questions that require support. Students have to justify, rationalize why they think the way they do. And we want recurring questions, so questions that will also come up again, questions that they'll have to explore, consider in other parts of history and other classes too. We don't want it just to be a one-time question that only matters in one particular situation. So if we can have these 7 characteristics in our essential questions, it'll help promote higher order thinking skills, which will challenge our students more fully and give it more personal meaning for them outside of the social studies classroom. One final area for growth. Michigan updated their standards last year, June of 2019, and part of the updated standards includes what's known as the C3 framework. And this is specifically for social studies, but I believe this type of work and thinking could also apply to other content areas as well. What we are trying to do is take our standards and help students get prepared more for what's considered the real world, or what the world looks like for them outside of the classroom and outside of school. So first, what is the C3 framework, and what are the new Michigan social studies standards? Well, one, the 3 C's in this framework stand for college, career, and civic life. Once again, the goal of these standards is to prepare students for life after school. We want our graduates to be living examples of challenging minds and lives for Christ, which means that the learning they do now needs to be something that will prepare them for their future and for life outside of school. And for the Michigan standards, if you open them up, and they're linked here on the presentation, you will find the words rigor, relevance, and relationships kind of in the background design of those standards. So we're looking for our units and our curriculum to be planned on these things: college, career, and civic life for our students, and then rigor, relevance, and relationships, especially when it comes to our social studies courses. Once again, why are we doing this? Because these two ideas, the 3 C's and the 3 R's, fit directly into our school mission of challenging minds and lives for Christ. Second is we want to create students that can engage God's world. They can be active difference makers for his kingdom and redemptive agents for Christ. So how can we do this? Well, if you look at the C3 Framework website, it says right towards the top when it explains the basics, inquiry is at the heart of social studies. So one thing we can do when developing curriculum and improving our instruction is possibly using something known as the question formulation technique, which asks students to not just give answers, but ask their own questions. And by asking their own questions, they're being put at the center of their learning, their minds and lives are being challenged, and they're using those higher order thinking skills we talked about before. Another framework that we have not used in Michigan, but is used in other states such as Iowa, is authentic intellectual work. And this is implemented by having teachers meet in teams. So we have grade level teams at Hudsonville Christian. So the 8th or 7th or 6th grade team can meet together and take turns sharing work with each other. And by using the authentic intellectual work kind of framework and template and guidelines, we can take our lessons, our assessments, our instruction, and help make it more authentic, more intellectual, and have more value beyond school, which once again fits into this idea of challenging minds and lives for Christ. And also we are able to sharpen each other's curriculum and instruction development by working together at grade level teams. The last thing is, instead of having traditional written tests or essays, we can use more project-based assessments. And these also can fit with ideas of inquiry, ideas of higher order thinking skills, ideas like student-centered and challenging content. Sometimes using a project where students take control of their learning is the best way we can challenge their minds and lives for Christ. So once again, we can celebrate the strengths we have, and we're already in a really wonderful place. But we also should continue to strive to move forward as the world changes. We want to continue to challenge minds and lives for Christ and look to meet students where we are. So hopefully, by focusing on these 3 areas for improvement, we can more fully live out this mission and more fully live up to this one body theme that our school has for the 2020-2021 school year.